Ever think just one person can change the course of history? Most people don't, but the truth is, some of the world's greatest empires were shaped by unexpected heroes, Catholic saints who stood up, spoke out, and turned the world upside down. If you think saints are just people carved in stone, tucked away in old churches, tonight you'll see why their stories still matter more than you realize. Empires usually run on power kings, armies, rules, and money. But behind the scenes, there are people who use something different. Not swords or gold, not laws or threats, but faith. That's how saints changed entire nations. And if you stick around, you'll learn how their choices and courage flipped the script for millions, long after their names were forgotten by everyone except those who study the real story. Let's face it, most of us are taught that history runs on conquering armies, big battles, famous rulers. But go deeper, and you find a different story. Turns out some of the biggest changes started in places you'd never expect a cold cell. A hidden church, a battlefield led not by generals, but a young girl who heard God's voice. So how do you actually shape an empire if you're not a king or a queen? The answer isn't simple, but the saints made it possible. Sometimes all it takes is someone who refuses to back down, even when the whole world says they're crazy. Sometimes it means risking your life, leaving everything you know, or surviving years of loneliness just to hold out for one last hope. Let's go straight to a story that proves this. St. Patrick and Ireland. Patrick wasn't Irish, he was kidnapped as a kid by pirates from his home in Britain. Stuck in harsh conditions in Ireland, Patrick found faith on the hills as a slave. Years later, after escaping, he could have chosen comfort, safety, and never looked back. But his heart pulled him back to the place that once imprisoned him. When Patrick returned, he didn't return as a king, he returned as a missionary. He faced tribal chiefs, warriors, and people who thought Christianity was strange and dangerous. His only weapons were kindness, courage, and the stubborn belief that everyone could change, and it worked. Patrick converted thousands, founded schools and churches, fought off superstition, and healed old feuds between clans. Ireland was transformed from a land of wild tribes and dark rituals to a land of faith, learning, and peace that sent scholars and missionaries across Europe. Without Patrick, the world would have lost a place of hope. One lonely boy, kidnapped and unwanted, changed a whole country by saying yes to God. Let's zoom out and look at France, one of the most famous empires ever. Its fate was set to collapse until a teenage girl showed up with nothing but faith and visions. Joan of Arc didn't come from nobility. She didn't have battle training. She just believed God was speaking to her. She convinced the Dauphin, the future king, to let her lead armies. While men laughed and mocked her, Joan pressed on, putting herself on the front lines, standing in armor among tired soldiers, bringing God's message and renewing hope in the hearts of her country. Through her leadership, Joan broke sieges, captured lost territories, and led men to victories historians never thought possible. Even after betrayal and a brutal death, Joan's legacy was so fierce, France was forever changed. Statues remember her now, but her real achievement wasn't just war, it was showing that courage mixed with faith moves nations, even when everything says it's impossible. Let's switch gears and look at a saint who changed the future through steady, patient work. St. Benedict. After Rome began to fall to pieces, chaos spread. Violence, ignorance, and suffering ruled. Benedict wanted a quiet life devoted to prayer, but his example inspired others. He wrote the Rule of St. Benedict, guiding monks on how to live with balance. Work, study, rest, prayer, and care for others. This idea spread. Monasteries popped up everywhere, becoming centers of learning. They protected books, taught people, grew food, cared for the sick. Across Europe, these places kept wisdom and faith alive in the darkest times. Without Benedict's legacy, Europe would have lost so much knowledge before the Renaissance even started. Ordinary monks and nuns became quiet teachers who built up the blocks of whole societies, and that started with one simple life. Jump over to Africa. St. Augustine. He started out wild, searching for pleasure and fame, turning away from faith. Years into his journey, after a battle inside, Augustine turned towards God and never looked back. He became Bishop of Hippo and guided both his church and the wider world through complex challenges, invaders, crumbling governments, arguments about truth. Augustine's teachings changed not just his city, but laws, ideas, and community values for centuries. His writings shaped how we talk about justice, mercy, and forgiveness all across the Christian world. Now Spain in its golden age meets Saint Teresa of Avila. At a time when riches and political power ruled everything, Teresa focused on changing the heart. Her prayers, books, and new ideas about giving your life to God sparked a movement that drew thousands. She built new convents, helped women find a voice, and guided popes, kings, and ordinary people searching for meaning. Teresa's honest words about struggle and faith still teach millions. And don't forget Saint Francis of Assisi. He was rich, surrounded by privilege. He gave up everything for poverty, brotherhood with all creation, and a radical love for God. His simple choices inspired a massive movement still alive today. Francis showed mercy was stronger than power, and love could overcome violence and greed. Empires may have rulers, but saints change hearts, and when hearts change, so does everything else. The biggest revolutions often start small and quiet. Sometimes they start in a choice nobody notices but God. Other saints shaped empires by guiding those in power. Saint Ambrose, a bishop in Milan, once stood up to an emperor over issues of justice. He demanded mercy for enemies and help for the poor, refusing to back down even when threatened. The emperor listened, changes happened, and a single voice shifted the decisions of a whole empire. Saint Catherine of Siena lived in divided times, with the church split into fighting factions. Through letters and visits, Catherine convinced popes and kings to work for unity, bringing hope back to lost people. Even the church's biggest splits and reunions often came down to saints who refused to accept shortcuts or simple answers, who prayed, spoke, and risked everything for truth. Here's something wild. Most of these saints didn't start out thinking they'd change the world. Many came from poor families. Some were orphans, some people with big mistakes in their past. Being a saint isn't about being perfect. It's about sticking to your beliefs when everyone else caves. The climax of these stories is this moment when everything seems hopeless and someone ordinary steps up. Ireland's wild clans, France's desperate soldiers, Italy's broken monasteries, Spain's divided people, Africa's frightened city dwellers. Every time a single person with insane hope made decisions that nobody saw coming. What's stopping us today? We all have reasons to step back, say we're too young, too old, too weak. But if faith and real love shaped empires back then, what's possible now? Every choice to forgive, every moment you help someone who can't repay you, every time you speak the truth when it's risky, these are moments that add up and change everything. Maybe you're not called to lead armies or change governments. Maybe your story is simple, even hidden. But the saints teach us that's exactly where revolutions begin. At the end, all the money, fame, armies, and power fade, but the choices of brave, loving people last forever. Empires forget their rulers, but they remember saints who changed the world for good. Remember, every generation writes its own chapter in history. If you're struggling to believe you matter, reread these stories. St. Patrick wasn't important until he said yes to God. Joan of Arc was just a teenager until she trusted her visions. Benedict wanted peace and ended up renewing nations. Augustine ran from faith and became a teacher for the planet. Teresa of Avila spent her days praying, then became one of the biggest spiritual leaders ever. Francis of Assisi chose poverty and built the world's most gentle revolution. Your choices matter. Your story belongs in the book they're still writing. The world changes one hope, one risk, one act at a time. Subscribe for more incredible stories about faith-changing empires.